thing? Aha, there it is. So I hope you'll hear me. I'm sorry if a little bit whispering today. So thank you, Mukhtar. Thank you, Afaq, for inviting me to Lebanon. It's my second visit here. Normally, I live in Kenya, in Nairobi, and for the last, I've lived there for 25 years actually, a long time. But I was born in Scotland many decades ago, and I grew up there, and I ended up in East Africa by mistake, and I walked into an art gallery, and I was interested in art, and I got a conversation started with the owner of the art gallery, and the next thing she offered me a job, and that was 26 years ago, and I'm still there. So for the last few years, then I've been in Nairobi in Kenya, and indeed, actually, my work takes me also to Tanzania, where we have a second operation, which I'm going to talk to you about. And for the last few years, I've been focused on change. How do we make change happen? And as Mukhtar said, I did work for a funding organization. I got involved with the idea about how do you create change? How do you get deliberate about making change happen? But I came from a background in the arts, so I was very interested in using art to cause change. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years, and that's the story I'm going to tell you about. So although I'm here representing this thing called Shujaz, I'm not alone in... Oh, that's me as well. That's my bagpiping other identity. But I'm here representing a lot of young people who live and work in our office in Kenya and in Tanzania. So I'm a bad representation of my organization in many ways. I'm much too old and much too white, because actually the people who do the work that I'm going to explain are these people. And I work with about 60 young people, mostly in their 20s, in order to cause a conversation to happen with young people in their 20s. So it's sort of important. So about 10, 11, 12 years ago, there was an election that happened in Kenya that went wrong. And maybe you read about it at the time. At the beginning of 2008, there was a general election, and two halves of the country basically went to war because they didn't agree on the outcome. And it was a terrible experience for what has always been a very peaceful country to come very close to collapse. And so we, and it took sort of Kofi Annan and sort of international peacemakers to come in and fix the problem and restore some kind of peace. But nevertheless, it was a terrible experience that needed to be worked through by the whole country. And so I got interested at the time in thinking about, was there a role for storytelling? Was there a role for media to sort of mitigate against a repeat of this national crisis? So at the time, we saw sort of three problems. One was that everybody we spoke to in the country was worried about youth. Everybody was worried about those 15 to 24-year-olds. Millions of young people with no jobs and no place in college and not in school, wondering what to do with their lives. It wasn't that those young people had no opportunities. There were lots of things for people to do in East Africa. It's just it felt like there was a missing connection. Young people were not finding their way to opportunities and ideas. And part of the problem was that the media was doing a bad job. The media was not serving young people well. The media is all funded by advertising. I'm sure that may be the case here too. There's no public media, and so it chases the money. So if you're young and you're poor, you're of no interest to advertising, and therefore you're of no interest to the media. So it felt like at the time there was an opportunity to do something new in that space. Could we create a media channel that would deliver good ideas to young people? Was there a gap? There was certainly a need. Was there a gap for it? And that's what we set out to achieve. So responding to these kinds of scenes where the country got close to the edge, we started thinking about a solution. And I think as the 10 years have gone by, the situation has continued to go badly wrong. I mean, I think all over Africa we're faced by sort of similar pictures of young people trying to flee, young people seeking solutions. And the population of sub-Saharan Africa suggests that those problems are going to continue. So you can see the situation here is these are the, I don't know if you can read that from behind here, but the population is extremely young and it's getting younger. So this chart here was from 2009, which was the last time they did a census in Kenya. So there have been about 13 million more births since then. So you can see what it looks like. The whole of Africa looks like this. Huge numbers of young people, all of whom seeking something to do with their lives. So for the last few years, we've been focusing on this blue band, the 15 to 24-year-olds. And we chose them because we thought they're the ones with the biggest issues today. They're the ones who we can potentially help the most. Young people who are not in school, who are wondering what to do, who are faced by choices, and maybe they can be influenced. Maybe they're still trying to make up their minds. Maybe young people are easier to talk to than their parents. So we started an organization really focused on that, based on a kind of belief that there's something to do. There are barriers preventing young people from taking control of the future. And actually, there's an opportunity, if we focus on that group who are mostly being ignored, there's a chance for us to create something powerful. But there's a challenge to reach young people who are not in school. How do you start a conversation with people who are not gathered anywhere where you can reach them? They don't watch the news. They don't buy the newspaper. They don't go to school anymore. They don't go to church. How can you connect with them? And we decided the way we would do it was with a story. So we, for the last 10 years, have been telling the story of this guy. And his name is DJB. His mum calls him Boy. We know him as DJB. He's 19. He left school last year. I've been saying that for 10 years. He left school last year. And he didn't get a job and he didn't get a place in college. But he does have a secret. He's built a radio station in his bedroom. And from his bedroom, he's able to hack into the frequencies of FM radio stations with his show, Shujaz, Heroes. Shujaz? It's a Swahili word, actually. Shujaz means hero in Kenya. So Shujaz is a show about young people taking control of the future. If you have a good idea, the DJ says, if you've got something which is working for you, send me a message. Tell me about it, and I will tell your story to all the youth in Kenya. And together we will step it up. So the other characters in his world are listeners to his show. They're young people, they're older, they're younger, they're boys, they're girls, they're urban, they're rural, they're from the coast, they're from the upcountry. And each of them has a mother and a father or a big brother or an evil uncle, or there's a corrupt cop or a wonderful girlfriend or a boyfriend. So we've created a universe here. The girl on the right is Dipti Divani. She's fallen in love with the DJ's voice on the radio. And she's appointed herself as a detective. And she's searched and she's found where the DJ broadcasts from. And she's met Boy. And she's in her search for her one true love, the DJ. But Boy, of course, has fallen in love with her, but he cannot admit that he's the DJ because his identity is a secret. So there's a terrible love triangle between Dipti and Boy and DJB. And we were so pleased with ourselves when we came up with that story. We thought we were really, that was the day, we were flying. And then we hired this wonderful producer, Fatima, and I was proudly telling her this story. And she said, "Isn't that exactly the same story as Superman and Lois Lane?" And we thought, damn, there are no original stories left. But we press on. So we created this story, and we thought at the beginning that it was going to be like a soap opera. That we would tell these stories, and the young people in the characters would send an idea, and then we would give us an excuse to talk about new things, and then we would circulate new ideas, and it would be very simple. But on the very first day that our story went live, somebody found the telephone number that we'd printed in tiny letters somewhere in our first edition of the comic book called Shujaz. And they sent the DJ a message. "Hey, DJB, I've got an idea. I've got something that's working for me." And actually, it turns out that real young people have populated the story. They've taken over. Even from that first morning, they took the story from us. Last year, DJB received 2.5 million text messages in Kenya. His Facebook page, we're talking about 20,000 messages a day of young people talking to him about the things that they're doing that are working for them, having that conversation. And so now as we look back, we realize we created something powerful, and it's somehow in the design here on the screen, because there are two things that are not here. The first thing is there are no adults. There are no grown-ups here. And the second thing is we do not have one of these. We don't have the wagging finger, it's my finger actually, the wagging white finger. We don't have one of them. And that's really, really important, because in causing change, the messenger is just as important as the message. The idea, where the idea comes from, is just as important as the idea. And actually here what we've created, without realizing it, is a safe space where young people can talk to each other. And actually ideas that come up through this crowd of young people have salience. They're credible precisely because they come from young people, and they don't come from the government. They don't come from dad. They don't come from the United Nations. They're not being pushed down. And that turns out to be super powerful. So the way we tell the story is on multiple different media platforms. So comic books, like an idiot, I didn't bring any. I forgot to bring any comic books with me. So I can't show it to you, but it's a little book, a little A5 color book printed on newsprint. And we've just printed our 100 millionth copy in Kenya since we started in 2010, which I think makes us the biggest comic book producer in the world now. We print about 1.5 million copies every single month, and we distribute them free in Kenya, and subsequently we added Tanzania, so we're in these two countries. We also make the radio show presented by the DJ. So we have a DJ, we make the show, and we syndicate it on multiple FM stations. We're on about, I think altogether about 20 FM stations across the region. And then obviously DJB is big on social media because he's a young Kenyan, so he would be. So we have all these social media channels that young people get involved with. So there's multiple ways that young people can engage with our story. So they can show up at a festival. We have festivals every weekends in provincial towns. They can watch a movie on TV that we shot on a Nokia mobile phone and then edited it into a 1 hour, 20-minute video called Jongo Love. You can watch it on YouTube. We're making games and we're all about conversation ultimately. Because as we started, we thought the way that change happens, the place that change comes from, is from conversation. It's only when we start to talk about things that we can reflect on how we think of them. Conversation is the first stage in changing our views, changing our ideas. So actually, what we initially thought we could do is just by encouraging people to talk about new things, putting words into the mouths of our characters or receiving messages from our fans, we could trigger conversation about new stuff. And it turns out to be right, but we've gone beyond that subsequently. We've won lots of awards, including we've won 2 Emmy Awards, which makes us the only people in Africa to have done that. And the Emmys are for this idea about this 360-degree media. And it's become big. So 100 million comics gets you a lot of audience. So these days, we reach about 56% of all 15 to 24-year-olds in Kenya every month, something like that. And that gives us about 5.6 million people in Kenya who follow the story all the time. And then we've got another 4 million Tanzanians. So altogether, it's somewhere close to 10 million people who are following this story all the time, in one way or the other, connecting through one or more of these media. And more, as young people get their hands on smartphones, obviously the conversation is going there. And so we're very interested in what happens when our audience goes digital. And today, something like 39% of youth in Kenya have access to a smartphone. And it was 34% last year. So it's growing quite fast. So we've learned a lot about how do you introduce new ideas. If you want change to happen, and you're trying to get people to adopt a new behavior, or a new idea, how do you introduce that? How do you get people to think and engage about something brand new? And we've done a lot of work trying to understand how the change process happens. And this is a tool that we've developed, which we found to be super helpful. And this tool began with a visit we had from a very nice lady from the World Bank who came to our office. And we were excited because we could smell the money. We thought something good is coming with this lady from the World Bank. So she said, could you please, she said, there's a new constitution in Kenya, and these days we want participation. So young people are supposed to show up in county budget hearings, and young people are supposed to argue for how the budget in the county should be allocated each year. Could you please, Shujaz, young people are not attending these meetings. Could you please move them in the direction of 100% attendance? And we're going, budget hearings, are you kidding me? I mean, really? Is DJB going to show up at a county budget hearing? I mean, really? Hasn't he got a million better things to do? But there was the money. We needed the cash. So how do we manage this? So we're trying to figure out, more than anything, how do we manage the expectations of the nice lady from the World Bank? Because she clearly thought that if she gave us a grant, we were going to cause like a stampede of hundreds of people. We're going to be storming into these county budget hearings. And we're going, well, it may not happen. How do we tell her that? So we went and did a little bit of research, and we went back to her and said, the problem is this, that young people are not at zero on this scale. They're at minus 100%, you've got to be kidding me. So her idea was that essentially there was some kind of knowledge deficit. That if we could just add more knowledge to these young people, if only they knew what the nice lady from the World Bank knows, surely they would all be attending these meetings. But of course, they have a lot of knowledge. In fact, their knowledge is complete. My knowledge is complete too. I know, no way am I attending that meeting. Actually, my cousin's friend's brother's nephew went to one of those meetings and he was beaten by the watchman. I don't know, you know. My friend went and he was humiliated by the chairman of the committee. Everyone's got a story. Everyone's got a good reason not to attend the meetings. So we showed this to the lady from the bank and we said, trouble is the audience are here. So we can move them. But it may be that the only thing we can do for you is we can get young people to hate you less. Is that success? Are you willing to pay for that? We can get them to hate you less than they do now. But by the way, that's important because if we're going to get them to show up, they're going to have to do that. We've got to get them all the way there. And then, amazingly, to her credit, she said, fine, let's do this. And we worked on a campaign which was all about trying to start the journey where our audience are, which is acknowledging the fact that they don't want to do this thing, and begin with these tiny steps to say, we'll get there, but we're not starting at zero, we're starting here. And actually, for a lot of the change that we're trying to bring to society in East Africa, this is the case. Most of the difficult things we want people to do to improve the world, they're difficult things. Mostly people have an idea before we start. They don't want to do it for their own good reasons. So how do we move them? And the first thing is by retreating to the beginning of the journey and saying, if we really understand where people are now, we can begin to change the way they talk. Can we introduce a topic? And can we take little baby steps? So here's an example of a story we made a few years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, where we were working on a campaign to try and get young people to understand the secrets of entrepreneurship. So we worked with some guys and we developed like 6 skills you've got to know if you're going to be a small business person. And each month we focused on a different one. How do you find an opportunity? How do you raise the money? How do you do your marketing? And then in the last month, we developed a game which looked a little bit like Monopoly. I think you know Monopoly and you go around. And along the way you learn some skills about business. And then we printed a copy of the game in the comic. And we encouraged, and we distributed 1 million copies. And we said, play it. And we started getting feedback almost immediately from young people who had played the game. And this young lady wrote to the DJ and she said, thank you, DJB, my business has tripled. My business has tripled. Well, we were happy to hear that. So somebody we sent the DJ, you can see him there, to interview her. And she has a kind of classic story. She's 21 years old. She's growing up on the border with Uganda in some rural place. She's been forced to leave her rural home. She's come all the way to the city. She's finding it difficult. Life in the city's difficult. And she's lost her family. She's lost all that support. And she survives by selling hard-boiled eggs to construction workers. Whew. That's the bottom. But what she learned by playing the game, she said, is that she realized that if she made kachumbari, which is a tomato and onion and chili, like a salad, side salad, if she offered that tomato salad together with the eggs, she tripled her sales. She went from one tray of 24 eggs, now she's selling 75 eggs, and she is delighted. So we put her back into the comic. We made another long story where she explained all of this, and we put her on television, and we put her on the radio, and we put her in social media. You could have a call in with her, figure it out, and we even made the game again, an improved version. But we ran into trouble here because by the time we heard her story, the campaign that we were working on about entrepreneurship was finished. And so the money we had, which came actually from some UK government organization to fund this, was all over. So we really wanted to tell her story, but we had no cash. We had no money to pay for the comics. So we're really looking to say, what's the angle here? And it turned out that the person who went to conduct the interview, who's one of our radio producers, after getting the whole story of how she made the kachumbari and how she did it, the last question was, she said, "So Winnie, have you got a boyfriend?" And Winnie was sort of, "We don't talk about that in Kenya. Have you got a baby? Whew. Have you got a baby on the way?" And she said, "A baby now?" She said, "I'm bulletproof. I'm bulletproof," she said. Now, right? But that turns out to be the most powerful message we've ever come up with to convince young people in Kenya to use contraception. Here's this gorgeous girl. She's got something she's figured out for herself. Her life is looking up, and she is bulletproof. And actually, that story turned out to be like our home run for contraceptions. And it actually has changed the whole way we think as an organization. And the reason it's powerful is partly because it comes from her. So the story started as a comic book, but then it jumped to a real person. And she happens to be a gorgeous young person. And so the story becomes ever more true because it comes from her lips. But actually, at the same time, we had another experience which was really important to us understanding how change can happen. We were in a pub in a town called Bomet, which is about 5 hours drive from Nairobi. And we were talking to young people about this issue, contraception. How do we get young people to take care of themselves? So many young teenagers having babies. Lives are stopping at that point. All of their ambition basically comes to a halt. So we were talking to these young people in this big bar, big hotel. And after the young people left, the manager came over to us and he said, "Why are you here? What are you doing with these guys?" And we said, "Well, we're trying to understand contraception here in Bomet." He said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "I have 20 waitresses who work here, different shifts during the week. 20 girls." He said, "All of them single mothers. All of them has a baby at home. All of them." It was like, that's the problem we're trying to solve. We said, could you get your waitresses to use contraception? He said, "Yeah, easy." "How would you do it?" He said, "I'd just promote them." "What do you mean by that?" He said, when she's the girl who's wiping the tables and taking away the empty glasses, she has nothing. She's living in crisis. Every coin which comes to her, she's already spent it before it gets to her. She knows exactly where it's got to go. She's living in crisis. So actually, she's trading with everything she's got. So if one of the customers of the bar says, "Should we go home now?" she's probably going to say yes. She has nothing. But he said the same girl, if she just walks around the bar, and now she's the cashier, now she's taking the money and writing the receipts, serving the drinks. Now she's promoted. He says, she's definitely using contraception now. And the change that happens as she walks around the bar is the change that happens when she puts her foot on the bottom step of a ladder that is reaching somewhere better. And there's an invisible switch that flips in her head, which says, I'm a different person now. Tomorrow suddenly looks like a better day than today because I'm the cashier now. And it's the same thing that happened to this girl when her sales of eggs went up by 3 times. She suddenly goes, I'm a different person now. So these days we call that agency. That's when someone feels they can do it. Tomorrow is better than today. And actually, we have now organized our whole business about that. Our whole business is focused on that idea of agency. So one of the challenges of this scale is that it's very hard to measure what's happening in the blue part. It's very easy to measure what happens in the red part. The lady from the World Bank could stand at the door of the budget and count people as they come in. But in the blue part, it's extremely difficult because nothing happened. It was just a shift in people's thinking. So in order to satisfy her, we had to start worrying about that. How can we measure? How can we show that they hate you less? Can we prove it? So we started playing around with data to say, what kind of information do we have or could we find that can help us tell that story? And so the first thing we did was start looking at the text messages that the DJ receives. He gets a lot. There's a challenge there because the language that our audience uses, and indeed the language that we use, is a kind of a made-up language called Sheng, which is not a real language yet. It's a mixture of Swahili and English and other, and it's the language that young people like to speak in Kenya. So in order for us to do this measurement, we had to firstly teach a computer how to speak Sheng, and that took us a little time. But after a while, we got into it, and we started being able to read the messages. There's so many of them. We can't read them. We don't have enough humans to read them. But the computer can start to read them, and we started to assign value to them. Is it about the topic? Is it positive? Is it negative? And we can start to count them. And also, is it sent by a boy, or is it sent by a girl, or is it sent by a rural person or an urban person? And so suddenly we're able to start seeing things that we couldn't see before. So one of the questions we were asking was, are people talking about contraception? And if they are talking about it, are they talking about it in a positive way or in a negative way? So the first thing we saw when we started analyzing the text messages is that boys don't care. Boys are very comfortable with contraception. The funny thing is that girls tell us that the reason they're embarrassed to use contraception is because they fear what boys will think about them. Well, according to this, the boys are pretty positive about contraception. It's the girls who are extremely negative in that, if you assign, this is an analysis of 2 million text messages. So, but a year later, when we do the slice again, you can see that actually we're showing how the sentiment of the girls in our audience is changing. And in fact, over 3 years, by looking at the trend in millions of text messages, analyzed by sentiment, and they're not messages we've asked for, these are spontaneous messages sent to us, we can start to see that actually a social norm is changing. Millions and millions of girls are now expressing themselves in a positive way, whereas before it was a negative way. So understanding how change happens has really become a thing for us. Can we be confident we know what it is that we're doing that triggers a change, and what do we do more of or less of? And so we've developed something which we call our theory of change. What happens? How does a story jump from a comic book into a behavior? So this is it for us at the moment. This is our current iteration. The first thing we do, and I've told you all of this already, is we tell a good story about real life. And we make sure it's true. And we make sure it's accurate. And we make sure it truly reflects the life young people are living. More than anything, I think the word validation is important. If you've never seen your own story being told, if you never switched on the TV and seen yourself or someone who looks like you, that when you come across that thing, people get excited, they feel validated. So when we get that right, we get trust. And we measure trust all the time. So we have about 65% of all Kenyans in youth know us, and about 56% trust us. So we don't lose that many. The attrition here is important. We measure that. How many stick to us? And we then measure how much do you trust us? By what means would we know you trust you? And then if we get that right, we can see two different things happening in the data. The first thing we can show is that when we introduce a new topic, our audience starts to discuss it. So we're happy with that. We're being successful. They are talking about it. Not only that, they're talking to more people. And that's important too. There's a joke about reproductive health, about contraception, about sex education, that most young people, when they want to know about sex, they ask their most promiscuous friend. The last person you want to ask for advice on your sex life as a teenager is your most promiscuous friend. And yet that's where people get their advice from. So actually, when we see that the conversational network is getting bigger, we go, okay, that's a positive, because you might be asking your aunt or your big sister or your mother. That's a better person to advise you. The second thing we can see changing is social norms. So when we try and establish what people expect, what people think that other people expect of them, we can see it changing. So we spend a lot of time measuring that. Can we be certain that people's expectations are changing? So it turns out then, when you change the conversation, when people are discussing things they weren't discussing before, and when you change the norms, and people think that their expectations of what could happen to them change, their behavior changes too. So we measure that, and we've done a lot of work with a couple of universities in the US to try and show that change is really occurring and that we are really the ones causing the change. And there's some very clever measurement tools that you can use for that, particularly using longitudinal panels, which means you go back to the same individuals year after year after year. And then you end up using something called multivariate regression analysis. I don't know how it works, but so what we're able to see then is that our audience starts to behave very differently to people who are not in our audience. We can compare the two. So obviously these are quite good results for us. We're trying to stop young people from having babies by mistake. So using contraception and recommending contraception is a big one. But what's interesting is we achieved this and we hardly mentioned anything about contraception. About as close as we got was, I'm bulletproof. So traditionally, the way contraception messaging is done in Africa is by someone saying, stay at home, be good, how dare you? But actually what young people need to hear is, that beautiful girl is bulletproof. Maybe I should be bulletproof too. And maybe if I'm feeling more confident, I have a reason to be bulletproof. And so actually, the really big number for us is this one here. So it turns out that the average Kenyan youth sees about $47 a month. That's the average turnover for a Kenyan aged 15 to 24. But if you're in our audience, you turn over 47 plus $20, $21 almost. And actually, in this study, we had about 1.2 million people in this. So actually, we were looking at something like $20 million a month being created by the story. All of that money is suddenly in circulation because all of these young people, like the girl with the eggs, are feeling more confident about the future. And when you have millions and millions of people feeling more confident about the future, you start to create social change. And it all came from a comic book. Actually, there's lots of data like that. There was a group from the University of North Carolina who was studying 4,000 young people for 5 years, going back every year and asking them. We were unaware that they were doing this work until they sent us their report and said, we think you should have a look at this. And it turned out that it was people who paid attention to Shujaz who were changing faster than everybody else they were studying. And one of the things they noticed was that if you were in our audience and you were a teenage girl, you're almost 3 times less likely to be married. And it was because of exposure to Shujaz. Using regression analysis, you can say, what caused this? Well, it turns out that if you're feeling more confident about the future, you don't have a baby. And if you don't have a baby, you don't get married. And it probably means you stay in school longer. And actually, it also means you've got more apps on your mobile phone. That's one of the things we've been looking at. Are you using technology? And all of these things, you delay your first child. You even delay your first sex. all of these things which we're not talking about. We've never run a campaign. We've never mentioned marriage, and yet we're having this massive effect on marriage. Young people making a decision to stay single because they have a plan. But the thing we're most excited about in this is this idea of agency. And we measure agency by saying, we use a number of scientific methods to say, do people feel like they have control? Do people feel like tomorrow is within their control? And we call it agency here. And it turns out that our audience have 5 times more feeling of agency than non-audience. And so we've become more and more interested in that idea of agency as the key, because agency unlocks so many good things. It turns out that if you have agency, if you're a hustler, which is how we like to think of these empowered people, you're already making more money. You're saving more. You're using contraception, we've seen it. You're planning to vote, and you're making decisions for yourselves. So actually, there's a whole set of snowballing things, good things that accrue when young people feel confident. And it turns out you don't have to tell them what to do. They make good decisions for themselves. You don't need anyone. You just need people to feel like they have a stake in the future. And then they make smart choices. So that's led us to something new that we're developing at the moment, which we're calling the Hustler MBA. So it turns out that about 1.3 million young people are going to enter the job market in Kenya this year. 1.3 million new job seekers, of whom less than 10% are going to find a formal job. So over 1 million young people are going to be seeking employment this year in Kenya who were not seeking it last year, because there were 1 million last year too. And that problem is repeated across sub-Saharan Africa. Massive growth of job-seeking young people with not enough to do. So since they will not be employed, they're going to have to hustle. They're going to have to figure it out for themselves. There simply is no other way. But how do you learn how to hustle? Where do you get the ideas from? Where do you get the skills? Because no one teaches you. You might be lucky. Your most promiscuous friend might also be a useful hustler who can teach you a few tricks. But otherwise, it's sort of sink or swim. So we started thinking about how could we teach hustling. And when we went out, we met so many young people who finished school last year, like the DJ. And essentially what they told us was, I'm tired of being taught. I don't want to be taught. I've had so many bad experiences in education. Don't bring me another educational experience. But I would like to learn. So we've made some experiments, and we've developed this thing called the Hustler MBA.
Kitu ilifanya nianze hii hustle. I wanted to be my own boss. Mimi napenda social media sana. Nilikuwa najiuliza, hii pesa watu make online ni gani? So nikaona best yangu anaitwa Daisy. So Daisy aliona nywele online. Akapost, nani anauza hii nywele kwa Kilimani Moms Marketplace? The whole day nobody answered. And I was like, so this hair is not even there. So nikachukua simu tu, nikaona anaziita ombre. So nilisearch ombre braids Kenya. So nilitafuta nani anauza hizo braids Kenya. Nipata namba ya mama anaitwa Betty. Akanitumia colors, nikajua bas. Huyu akona mingi. Nikapigia Daisy, akaniambia, okay, niletee 4 tao. Nikasema bas, haso neno, haso ni hii.
So this girl is explaining there, to those of you who don't speak Sheng. She's explaining how she was watching a conversation happening on Facebook, on a page, Kilimani Mums Marketplace. And there was a demand for hair braids, hair extensions. And the whole day, nobody answered. No one was able to say that they could. So she went online and she searched and she found a provider and she called and she said, I've got the braids, I can sell them. And somebody said, bring me some to town. And that's when she goes, that's when I realized, what's my hustle? This is my hustle. So that little film is the first video in our Hustler MBA. It's a young person who could be any young person. She has no advantage. She doesn't come from university. She hasn't got a professor in the family. She's just and she's telling you, how did I get the spark, that little idea for my business? And then right behind it is another video where she says, how did she raise the money to buy the hair braids to take to town to sell to the lady? And then how did she handle that customer? And actually, each of these videos comes with a little bit of question and answer. And we've made 30 videos with her, where we work our way through the curriculum of a business school, I guess. And we've made that with a whole bunch of different, very easy to follow hustle ideas, and we've ended up with actually 800 films at this point. So now, if you want to copy that girl, you can follow her whole journey. Or if you want to be like a motorcycle taxi driver, we've found this guy, he's awesome. And he explains how he's doing his business. But also, if you're already a business person and you're struggling, we've now got like a masterclass in marketing where we can take you through all kinds of ideas, or how do you negotiate with your landlord? Or if you're a young person and you simply don't know what to do. If you're like a rural girl and you've got $20, how do you get started? Well, actually, we can take you on a journey through the data, and we can show you other young girls like you who have made it happen and how they got the spark and what they've done. And then online, actually, using an app we've made, you can then interact with all the other students around these different videos, and you can start sharing your experiences. And it's turned out to be super powerful. And in fact, now we are building another thing around that, which is a set of encounters that happen in cyber cafes and video dens and kind of PlayStation hubs in villages all across Kenya. So we're going to have thousands of venues where young people are going to be meeting to watch these videos. And actually, so where we've got to then is our theory of change is extending. So what I showed you before was this journey to here, where by changing the conversation and changing the norms, we could trigger a new behavior. But what we're about to get to is the next stage, which becomes possible when we have a digital network, when we're not any longer communicating with the whole country using a comic book and a radio show, but now we're communicating with individuals, and we can send the rural boys one set of ideas and the rural girls another set of ideas. But actually, that's led to something else, because the data that we've been analyzing using language processing that allowed us to show how young people are moving through the rejection scale, that data starts to be useful for lots of different things. So we've just run an experiment where we took 1 million messages from our database at random, 1 million messages sent by 250,000 young people. And we anonymized it. And so we just had telephone numbers and messages. And we, working with some academics out of MIT, we looked at patterns that existed in these text messages. So we just said, based on the words people are using and the speech patterns that they might be using and the time of day that they're writing and the subjects that they're interested in and the tonality and the sentiment of that, can we conclude anything about these young people? So we did sort of 4 passes through the data, and the messages started clustering into 5 groups, immediately into 5 groups. And at this point, all we know is that every time this one phone number contacts us, they return to that same group. And this other phone number, always they come back to that group. So there's something that the people in that group have in common, but we don't know what it is. There's just something. So having clustered our 1 million messages into 5 groups, we then surveyed the 250,000 people. And we discovered that one of these groups is filled with hustlers, with high potential small business people. And actually, we then de-anonymized the numbers, and we went and we randomly visited a whole bunch of these different people. We just showed up, and we were 100% right, that the invisible meaning in the text messages that we received could tell us that these people were high potential small business people. And actually, what we discovered, like that girl, McKenna, who was selling hair braids, they're young people with passion, they're young people with ambition, and they have drive, but none of them has access to a bank account. So we took that information to the biggest bank in Kenya, and we said, currently in our database, we have 583,000 young people who we believe are high potential, high energy young hustlers. It's 22% of our audience. And none of them can have access to bank account because you can't serve them because they have no credit history. The guy from the bank looked at me and he said, those people are the whole world. They're the whole world. And he said, we can't serve them because they come to us. They all look the same. All of these young people, they look the same. None of them has anything. They carry no history with them. And I'm saying, well, we've done this experiment, and we can tell you which ones are the high potential small business people. Can you serve them now? So we're working on that at the moment. Because we think that the next stage in our theory of change is unlocking the data. So we've seen an inefficiency in the market. We've got 22% of the youth of Kenya who have it in them to be a hustler. We've got another 8 million who we think we can turn into hustlers by giving them the opportunity to study our Hustler MBA. And we've got a pile of almost infinite data which starts to reveal truths which are extremely powerful. Inefficiencies which allow us to lift young people up and allow the bank to step down so that they can meet in the middle. And actually we're arguing with the bank right now because we're saying, well, if we bring you these customers and it's cost you nothing, then whatever you would normally spend to acquire a customer, we need you to give that money to those young people because your cost has dropped. What's the lifetime value of a new customer? Surely some of that should be returned to them. Some of it should come to us too for making the introduction. But we can create an efficiency in the system. The next thing we're working on at the moment is to say, can we know which of our young people is likely to be pregnant? Can we do the same exercise there? The patterns reveal themselves in the data. What about diabetes? Type 2 diabetes is the health crisis coming to Africa. Can we see which people are likely to get type 2? Can we send those people the right nudges, or can we actually send them to a doctor? That's where we're hoping to go next, with a story that begins with trust. It begins with authenticity, and it begins with truth. But it ends up, we think, with something powerful, even more powerful than what we've built today. And that's where we're hoping to take it. That's our next horizon. And that's also the end of my story. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Rob. That was fascinating. I think you can produce 600,000 versions of this presentation every single time. I wanted to just start off by asking you the first question before opening it up. And I have a million questions for you, but essentially I think at the heart of the matter is this issue of trust and the lack of cynicism, and this notion that you introduced in your theory of change, which is the player first idea. So much development that is geared towards young people and people in need, as analyzed by World Bank and other development agencies, are often treated in a cynical manner. So development programs are often frighten young people, especially those who might have any potential, right? And so we see 80% failure in development aid all around the world because of the cynical kind of finger-wagging trait. But I can't believe that millions of young people over a period of 11 years still passionately follow a story that has been actually engineered for them to become civically and socially and morally engaged in their societies. So can you say something about this crucial element, because so many of us working in development and in the civic and social change vectors continuously make this mistake by talking on behalf of others, thinking that we can outsmart them. So if you can just say a few words about that before we open it up, please.
So, I get a chair and I'll.
Yeah, let's.
No, I don't mean that. I was thinking. I think that we started off as storytellers.
Who tells the stories?
Yeah, okay. We started off as storytellers. We thought there was power in story. We thought the best teachers are the best storytellers. So if we're able to create a good story, then we'll sweep people along because they'll think with their hearts and their stomachs as well as with their heads. And we had faith in that. So for the first several years, we thought, well, just tell a good story. But I think that the luck was that we constructed the story the way we did, where we put this young person in the center of everything. And we made his the mouth that speaks the words. And knowing that it had to be credible and linking it to the radio show, so these two channels had to have the same story, the same voice, I think turned out to be a brilliant thing. And the idea for that came out of a workshop with artists. I had a whole gang of young people who we were all thinking about this together at the beginning. And I remember one of these guys who was one of our cartoonists just saying, but shouldn't the DJ from the story also be the DJ on the radio show? And I was like, yeah, of course. And then subsequently I was doing focus groups. I was showing comic books to young people just to understand, would people respond to a comic book? And I said to these guys, in a slum in Nairobi, and a young man there, and I said, which language should our comic speak? And the guy went, well, obviously, if you're in the comic, he said, then you'll be speaking in English. And if my mother is in the comic, then she'll be speaking in Swahili, and if I'm in the comic, I'll be speaking Sheng. And it was like, yeah, of course. And I think by these processes, and I think more than anything actually, by putting faith in the artists who we worked with, we designed something which had integrity. And that integrity we very quickly realized was incredibly important. And so you mentioned it just then. We have this notion in our office we call it player first. Player first. So even though we take money from people like the World Bank, they are definitely second in every decision that we take. The first decision is always, are our audience getting what they want? Are they going to be delighted? Are they going to be excited? Are they going to have more fun? Are they going to get laid more? Are they going to make more money? Those are our first questions. And the World Bank will fit into that or not. But if we start putting the World Bank first, and I think, so we're not slaves to any money. That's super important. If we had taken an enormous check from the World Bank that day, we would have become their slave. But we've never done that. We work with everybody. We work with Unilever, we work with Coca-Cola, sometimes we work with Microsoft, we work with big brands, but we also work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we work with the government of Kenya, we work with UK Aid, we work with all these people so that nobody owns us. In the end, it's our story. We invite them to join us on our journey. We don't go on their journey.
And the average age of people involved is 26,
yeah.
And the people who write the stories are exactly in the age bracket of the intended audience. They're between 17 and 25, right?
Yeah. And that's really important too. Yeah.
So authenticity and the genuine nature of the storytelling is super crucial. First question.
Can I ask just like a quick burst? That requires a quick answer. Are you a for-profit organization?
We're a for-profit business. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe closer?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So I asked if they were for-profit. He said yes.
We're a for-profit business. Yeah.
I was wondering about the issues that you tackle within your stories. So you mentioned about ideations and soft and hard entrepreneurial skills,
yep.
translating them into a media output. Do you also tackle societal issues, political issues in a way that's digested? Like you said about the contraception, you don't mention contraception, but would that be similar for, let's say, an environmental issue that's related to policy that you would, kind of process in a way that's indirect and
yeah.
you would, so do you do that? And if you do, How about the external ecosystem, and what's the reaction of the policymakers, the politicians, the whole security apparatus? Because I'm sure that you have a lot of exposure, and eyes are on you, and they're waiting. Intelligence agencies, not to mention. So, how does this whole thing work? And did you receive any threats? And you could go on from here because you got the gist. Thank you.
So we have 3 goals that we're working on, 3 things that we are measuring. So we want our audience to have more agency, that feeling. That's the number 1. We also want them to be financially fit. And so we measure that in a certain way. We say, do you earn more? Some of the questions were there. Do you earn more than you spend? Are you saving? Do you have a cushion? If your money stopped today, how long could you survive? So we have a thing we call financial fitness that we track. So agency, fitness, and health. Because we think if you have those 3 things, then you are bound to succeed. So those are the things we're trying to achieve for our audience. And we seek partners to help us achieve that. And we measure everything we can, everything in those 3 things to get to our big goal, which is young people taking control of the future. Now, when the elections come around, everybody comes to see us. Would you mind? We've got this thing, it's really good. Could you help us with that? And so we don't go near party politics, but we do go near governance. So we spent a lot of time before the last elections just demystifying the election process. What's going to happen? When you go to vote, what actually happens behind the curtain? When we've created a new political structure, how does that really work? And the first thing we do is we say, where are our audience today? So on the environment, obviously Kenya, famous for its wildlife and those things. So I was, earlier this year, last year, we were approached by a foundation in the US saying, could we do a campaign on elephant conservation? And we said, well, the problem is we do not understand what young people think about elephant conservation. We think we know. We think young people are not very interested. So we said we cannot do a campaign without doing research. So then we went to say, on our rejection and adoption scale, where do we start? Because we can agree that elephant conservation is important. But really, how do we have a conversation with Kenyans about that? We have to find the right place to begin. Where can we start where everybody is, okay, I'm interested. And actually what we got to is that people are interested in the 10 square meters where they live. We can have a conversation about that. So the environment of the 10 square meters or 20 square meters or 5 square meters, that we can have. Everyone is interested in that. Everybody would like to make that place better. So we went back to the American Foundation and we said, we can do that. And that's the first step. We'll get to the elephants. Now, it turns out some young people are already passionate about elephants. So we can do something for them as well. But they're 10%, maybe less than 10%. 90% I hear, I don't care. I just want to know whether this place where I live is clean. Maybe I can plant a tree. But it's the journey where it ends up with elephants. So we insist on that. Can we find the right place? And as a result of that, we can usually cope with politicians and those threats. And we're not dealing with those, we're dealing with these things. We work with the Roman Catholics on contraception. They don't know yet, right? Because we're working on agency. We know actually we're going to measure contraception outcomes. But actually the thing we're working on with the Roman Catholics is all about agency. That's the gift we can give. Those things will look after themselves. We don't know whether the secret police have come to us because they're secret. Maybe they have. We do some work right now on extremist violence. So one of the challenges, maybe you're aware, in Kenya we've had a number of terrible, terrible attacks from Al-Shabaab coming from Somalia. So we've done some work on that. But actually, the work we do on countering Al-Shabaab is a work about stories. It's saying, you've got choices. Young people like you can decide what to do. Other people in your place where crisis is coming, they've made a different decision. They haven't turned towards Al-Shabaab, they've turned away. and we're telling those stories. So we're actually working very hard on that, but we're doing it by telling an alternate story. We don't actually have to mention Al-Shabaab, but we do make sure that those stories are definitely finding their way into the communities where recruitment is happening. But it's all invisible, I think. And it's all very benign. There's no secret. It is what it is.
Thank you. I have a question about your data. Do you sell your data? Do you have people who come to you and ask you to sell the data that you have? And how do you take the decision whether to give them data or not?
So we just say no. So it's easy. So our view is that the data was left with us. It still belongs to the young people who left it with us. What we're hoping to achieve is to find value in it. That value doesn't exist unless you have a lot of it. We only got that insight about the financial services because we had millions of messages. And so on its own, it has no power. In aggregate, it has apparently enormous value. So we're actually trying to figure it out right now. How do we protect it? How do we protect the trust that we've got? I think the moment we sell it, we're going to break the whole thing because we'll lose the trust. Whereas I hope the way we're going, as I've explained, around trying to figure out these financial services, and the story we're telling back to our audience is, we worked this out with you using your data. Now we're going to share the value amongst the people who want to participate. But it's also a choice that our audience can choose to opt in or they can opt out.
So you mentioned something very important about the phases in order to get behavioral change, and one of them was gaining their trust, people's trust. So how long did it take you to gain their trust, and do you fear losing it? At some point where it gets difficult, the status quo doesn't change, people are disappointed, a lot of despair, so how do you deal with that?
So it's hard to know exactly how long it takes. What we know today is that when somebody meets us for the first time, it takes between 6 months and a year before we start seeing significant change in the way they act. And that could be shorter if they have, we think the magic number is about 6 meetings with us. So if they see us, if they encounter us 6 different times on different channels, if they're on social media and print, then it happens much quicker. So people who are on 2 platforms with us get there much faster. Now, the reason it's hard to know exactly, though, is because the brand called Shujaz is massive in Kenya and Tanzania. So everybody kind of knows it. So it comes with a huge halo of trust. Whereas if we launched today in a new place, it would take much, much longer to build that trust from zero. Because there's a reputation that it has a brand. So everybody kind of knows it. So people, when they become a fan, and particularly we think when they join us on social media, the act of touching their phone is the act of transformation. So one of the things about a mobile phone, if you're a young African, is the phone asks your opinion. And very few young Africans ever have anybody ask their opinion. So when you get to like something, that's an incredible gift. A lot of young people who have never felt that anyone had ever asked for that before. And so the act of joining enables people to recategorize themselves. So they enter another group. It's a bit like the girl walking around the counter. Suddenly she thinks of herself in a different category. So she takes on a slightly different identity. And this identity comes with all of the values that the brand carries. So actually, the notion of identity is critical to the notion of how change transfers. So when I become a member, I change my identity in a totally subconscious way. But I now become this other person. It asked for my opinion. I gave my opinion. I joined. I liked the page. Now I become this other type of person. I'm now a member of this group. So I better behave like the group. So We think that's how it works. And that is built on a fragile mountain of trust and experiences that are incredibly easy to break. So the moment we sell our data, I think it's gone. The moment we advertise something in the storyline which is inappropriate, it's gone. The moment we betray the trust of some young person who's told us a confidence, it's gone. We worry about it all day. We worry about it because we've got 18-year-olds working on our social media pages who might not understand the importance of what they're doing. So we try and figure out how do we make the culture of our organization work so that everybody gets it. Because we've got 20 young people who are on social media all day long representing us. Do they really know what they're doing? It's like a nightmare. Especially as they're all these wonderful young people that we hire. It's almost, in every case, it's their first job. So they have no idea what it is to work in an organization. And in our organization, it's quite odd. So they come in and they just have no clue what they're doing. So we have to have like these maternal figures who spend their whole time trying to maintain the team and get them to think the way we think, understand the values, so they really believe it. So that even on their own at night, when they're online, they extend the values, because it's the trust is built on the values of the business. And the values are enshrined in everything that we do.
I have a personal question.
Sure.
Why do you do what you do? I'm always interested in the why. Why?
Well, I absolutely love it. I got here by a series of accidents. My poor mother is still waiting for me 26 years later. I had no plan to be here, but I kept seeing something exciting presenting itself. And I'm very proud that it's a for-profit business that we do, that we're not an NGO. We don't accept, we try not to be to think or act like an NGO. We think there's a service we're providing that creates value, and that value ought to be sustainable and commercial. And I think in our latest venture with the data, we might finally have figured out a sustainable business model, that it might actually be able to grow without us going back to those big partners who give us funding. Why do I do it? Because I think I might be contributing to something good in the world. And I'm also able to educate my children. So somehow those two things are both possible. And that feels like a good place to be.
Winning 2 Emmy Awards.
Okay. Yeah.
Must be doing something like.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel on a good day like I have it. Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And how you connect the different notions into media outlet, and how you have different product lines under your company. And it's very interesting how you track individual stories in order to highlight less represented, overwhelming population of Africa. But I'm interested to know, or I'm wondering if it led into the emergence of communities either online or offline in real life. And these communities are interested in forging some sort of change. So have you encountered or have you highlighted such a story on such a community?
Thank you. We see it happening all the time, that groups of young people come together under the idea of Shijaz. And we've observed it happening for quite a few years, and we've tried to encourage it, but we haven't known how to do it. And I think as our audience now starts to go online, that we see real potential there, that we can really take a very active role in that. So our Hustler MBA idea, we are creating these clubs where we're saying, in your area, you could be invited to attend a meetup, and then young people come together in a place with a TV and an internet connection, and they watch a piece of video together. And we're trying to do the same thing with the World Wildlife Fund. So in our elephant idea, the small number of young people who are really passionate about wildlife, we're working with them to say, oh, you can meet up. Oh, there's a thing happening in your neighborhood. If you're in Marilao on Saturday, you might want to show up at this thing. And what we're finding is young people are very excited to do that. So we're working hard to make that happen. And we think the future is in that, actually. It's also risky, because then things are happening and we don't manage them or own them. So there's some protection that we're worried about. Can we just have people creating events under our brand? What happens if some security issue occurs and it's coming under our umbrella? So we're a bit worried about how to manage that, and we don't yet have the answer. But I think we'll get there, because we think that's where the real power is going to be. If we can get enough people and we can say thousands of people doing stuff.
And the idea of online communities is also an idea that might be kind of developed as part of this
Definitely.
As well.
No. The lady in the video said she was watching an online marketplace, although it's something we're exploring. If we're going to create these hustlers, many of whom have small businesses, should they not also be able to sell to one another? So we have that in plan, especially with the bank, if there's an opportunity to use digital money to exchange. So we hope to get there. But we think that the driver for all of our work is not money. So even though people are seemingly desperately poor, so one of the things we learned actually in the early days was that money is never the driver. So we did a lot of work on agriculture at the beginning, where we would try and encourage people to use new types of agricultural product, maybe like an improved seed or a new technique. And all of our campaigns were about how much money you could make. And they all fell flat. And in the end, we went and we started to do proper research. And essentially said, I don't care about the money. I want dignity. And there's no dignity in digging in the ground. So actually our whole campaign had to become about that. How do we re-engineer the idea of agriculture so that it can become about dignity? And actually what we got to, in Tanzania especially, we've run a huge campaign essentially on agricultural innovation. But we made it about the food industry, the food business. Because it turned out people were able to have a conversation with us about the food business, but they were not able to have a conversation about farming. I will not talk about farming, but I'm quite interested in the food business. They don't want it. So, but it's not about the money. It's about the dignity. It's about making sure that people feel like they're becoming somebody. That's the idea. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful that I came today, and this is very impressive work. So I used to work at the IMF, which is similar to the World Bank, and I took a one-year sabbatical to start something like what you're doing, which is reach youth on media. And I've been failing really badly. Like, I barely have 500 people watching. And I wonder what I can learn from your experience, because I think what I've learned so far is that I've been waving my finger, like you're saying. So how do you think I can replicate your experience if I'm doing videos? Like, what are the tips that you could tell us without waving my finger? Like, where do I get started? Like, how do I figure out where I stop?
Go to your 500 young people and give them the camera.
Give them the?
Camera. Let them make it. If they make the content, your audience will grow. Your problem is who's making it. I mean, from the little you've said, I would say, number one rule, let your fans make the content. Don't try and make it. I don't make any, I wrote the first chapter of our comic, and I've never done it again. So don't do it. Get your fans to do it. Find the most engaged 20 people in your 500 and invite them to come and say, I'm going to give you this equipment, if you're willing. Go and make me some stories, and give them just a little bit of direction to what it is you're hoping for. And take whatever money you were spending before and give it and buy them lunch and have them do it. That's how I would go about it. I bet that changes your... And then it'll be authentic, it'll be true, it'll probably be funny. It won't be like this. You need to choose the right young people, but if you choose the really creative ones who have good ideas, let them make it. They'll win everything. You can't do it unless you, that would be my advice. Always, 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 always give the camera to them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to end. And again, it's at the, in my opinion, it's at the heart of this entire success story and many other success stories is who is speaking to whom, who's speaking on behalf of whom, and who is at the center of the voice and the agency and the vision and the ideas and the culture that is part of this media, part of the media channels that is trying to change something, norms, society, values. And I think, the lack of cynicism, the authenticity, the fact that young people run this entire venture speaks a lot about what succeeds, especially in this very complicated, media-saturated, and highly didactic moment in our lives where young people and citizens in general, we see that all around the world, are very cynical of messages. People don't trust neither governments nor the corporations nor the IMF or the World Bank or other white hands that are wagging at them. And so I think this is an incredible, important lesson, and it's very humbling for those of us who think we know what's right for others to drop that attitude and let others be. If people are meant to be served, they should be driving the change. There's a very interesting, and I'll end with that, statement that was developed by the disabilities movement about 20 years ago. And it was highly successful, and they said, nothing about us without us. And it means that nothing about the disabilities rights movement, nothing from legal all the way to practical, should happen without us being at the center of it. And that statement has now begun to change how people think about development and social change in the nonprofit world or in the development world. Thank you so much, Rob. We could spend hours with you on this. Thank you, Afaq, for bringing Rob here. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.